Good morning, everyone. Hi, Jen. Hi, Emily. Hi, Anthea. Hi, Dominic.
Good morning.
Good
Good.
morning.
How's it going?
Good.
Yep, it's very
Just,
sunny where
just
I
had
am.
another Zoom meeting before this, so
Okay.
breathe deeply.
It's a new one. We're gonna shake off whatever happened in the other ones
Thank
and,
you. Yes,
move into the new
I
one.
need that.
So we actually have quite a lot to cover, and I know I sent a kind of last minute email, but yeah, there's a lot of just buzz throughout the past 24 hours. So as we're waiting, because I know Michelle is going to join and maybe some other people, if you want to take a look at your inbox and just review.
I have a point of clarification.
Mhm.
I'm a little confused. I mean, this particular subgroup was decided to be formed just last week. How did it already get bogged down in all this bureaucracy? I mean, come on, guys. We've had enough bureaucracy in this whole issue since day one of the big committee. If it's going to be bogged down here, I'm out. I'm not going to be involved.
Um, I hear you, John. There's a lot that's gone on in the past 24 hours. But as a member of the subgroup, I welcome you. So I drafted a really quick agenda to try to cover some of the points that were brought up.
Your
Um,
agenda was great. It's what the email you sent today that kind of knocked me back.
yeah. So if there at the bottom of that, there was an agenda that kind of went through maybe covering some of the points, and I can go through it right now. But if there's anything that you would want to prioritize, you are the member of this subgroup. So, this is really what you make it. I'm just trying to give you all the things that came out of it so that you have the whole context and the what do you call it? The not environment. Well, yeah, kind of the environment of what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I thought that the main thing that this particular subgroup was supposed to be doing was come up with ideas to present to the facilitator of these public meetings for how they can best reach out to get people to be there or to do them in particular locations, or that kind of thing. But this
Mhm.
whole thing with this person who got involved and you sent us the email. I mean, come on, good Lord.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense if I just go ahead and go through some of the intended agenda and then yeah, maybe some of the other things will make a little bit more sense. Um, okay, let me share my screen.
Um, Ashira, I just noticed that Michelle joined. Don't want to interrupt, but thought maybe Michelle could introduce herself real quick.
Great. Um, would it be okay if we quickly go through the agenda and then we'll one of the subject points is Michelle as well. So
But yep, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
no
Welcome,
worries.
Michelle.
And thank you so much, Michelle, for joining. Let's see. Quickly share my screen. Okay. So as John pointed out, the main purpose of today's meeting is really to think about the ways of engagement um, for the EAG and kind of coming up with recommendations for helping the public engagement process, both through Curtis and through other venues that the EAG might have connections to. So when I drafted this, I thought that is definitely the priority. So spending a little bit of time going through some of the process, just what do we imagine for the subgroup? Is this going to be one that we need to have multiple meetings? It seems like with the amount of content that we have, we might need to have some regular meetings. Thinking through some of the topics that this subgroup can discuss, both as it relates to the final report and as it relates to the actual engagement process, and really just the objective of the subgroup. We have the questions that Jen sent over. Um, and so Jen, I'll give you a chance to kind of walk through those and talk us through what you were thinking of when it relates to those. We do have the concerns that Mia brought up on behalf of the EAG. So that was a list of different questions that the EAG talked about in the last few meetings regarding the public engagement that Curtis Reed, the public engagement facilitator, did on April 17th. And John, that may be what you were referring to with the email chain. So that was a chain between Aaron, who is the person from Vermont who's in charge of Curtis's contract, and the questions that the EAG posed in the last couple of meetings. And then we have a moment for questions for Michelle. And then Dominic also sent over the plain language explainer. And I'm not sure if that's something that we'll be able to get to today, just given that we only have 1 hour, but something that I wanted to make sure was on the agenda as well. So like I said, this is something that I just put together, trying to put all the pieces together in one place. But please let me know if there's something, a specific piece of this that you'd like to prioritize, pieces that you want to bring to earlier parts of the meeting, etc.
I'm curious, John, as you mentioned when you first joined, that this group was formed to talk about maybe shared experiences, to share with the public engagement facilitator or the PUC for public engagement. So I'm curious, Ashira or John, where you see that fitting into this agenda. Is that in the process, or is that in the review of public engagement concerns? Because I feel like that should be.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm just curious where that discussion of I agreed with John that my understanding of this subgroup was to share best practices and experiences for public engagement from our member organizations, and I'm curious where you feel that fits into the agenda. Does that clarify that?
Yeah. On the agenda that we have in front of us, I'm not sure that it fits in anywhere.
Yeah, Ashira, do you have a recommendation of maybe where we could fit that in, if Jen agrees that's a part of the discussion today?
Yeah, so I would say that that could be a main piece. I think that that was kind of where I had the objectives of the group. So just going ahead and clarifying what this group is really aiming to do. And so sharing best practices. Sounds like it's a key piece. So I was wondering then, does it make sense to talk a little bit about just this process piece with the objective and the topics, just so that we know what we're talking about, and then it'll be a little bit easier to reorder what we need to do and when.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So for now, we could kind of leave the frequency of meetings aside and maybe talk a little bit more about the objectives of this group, the perceived objectives, and then maybe we can go into the topics to discuss, and then we can think about prioritizing that.
Sounds great.
Okay. Jen.
I just wanted to clarify where my questions fit in. My teacher background kind of leads me to feel like when you're asking for public input, you want to kind of be welcoming and ask what kind of input we want. So my questions were just a way to kind of see whether those are the kind of questions we, as a subcommittee and as a equity advisory group, I feel like personally, I'd like to hear people's experiences and have input on just general how this, weatherization and transition to clean heat and their income and barriers are affecting them, rather than kind of what's their opinion of Act 18, because like what we're charged to do is to look at an equitable way to help them, to help, you know, marginalized groups come into the transition. So that's where I feel my questions. It's not like it just was my yearning to tell the public what we were looking for in these input sessions, and to see whether that's what other people agreed for we were looking for.
I think Michelle and I are happy to respond to those questions in the moment as part of our discussion. And just to add on to that, I think in terms of topics to discuss, I had prepared Michelle, and happy to introduce Michelle whenever is appropriate for you, Shara. But I was thinking the way that we would show up today is to share Efficiency Vermont's experience in public engagement and best practices, just from my understanding of what this group is. So I think adding on to what John said, that's what we're prepared to share today.
Awesome. And I didn't mean to hold Michelle from being introduced. If you want to go ahead and do that now, that's fine.
Oh, sure. Yeah, either way, I'm fine. But hi, I'm Michelle McCutcheon-Shore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Efficiency Vermont. I oversee a team of 4 people that does community engagement for the organization. So we traditionally were actually founded to do outreach to designated downtowns and really look at communities across the organization that maybe needed additional support in accessing our services. But in the past few years, we've really morphed to focus on equity and how does Efficiency Vermont contribute to an equitable, just transition to clean energy, weatherization, that sort of thing. And particularly in the last 2 years, we did a conservative effort across the state to collect feedback and understand how our services do or do not reach the frontline and impacted communities, which is the list of 13 organizations identified in the oh my goodness, 2021. Emily, you gonna back me up here? What is that list from?
The Clean Heat Standard EAG, it was listed in the statute, right? The list of the member organizations.
Yep. Thank you. So yeah, I'm not going to say we have it all figured out, but we learned a lot from the last 2 years about how to collect feedback on really complicated issues and questions that a lot of people just don't have a lot of knowledge on. And so in talking to Emily, she thought it might be helpful to just share what went well, what didn't go well, how we've pivoted, and kind of how we're moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And just from the other members of the subgroup, maybe, okay, so I'm balancing, maybe just hearing a little bit more what you might like to hear from Michelle and her role today. Because I know, you know, the different things you want to do. So if there's specific things that you want to hear.
Well, again, I was under the impression that one of the things that we were going to be covering from all of us is what sorts of things do we have personal knowledge of that have worked in terms of community outreach, what hasn't worked, and what additional ideas might we be able to come up with that could make some sense. And that doesn't include just Michelle, but that's all of us.
So would you like to dive straight into that then?
I would. I mean, it depends what everybody else wants to do, of course, but.
Alrighty. I'm seeing some head nods, so I'm going to take that as a yes, but if there's any objections, please let me know. So best practices. And go ahead, we can jump straight into it. I'll give equal opportunity to each of the members, as well as I think that Emily and Michelle are working in tandem, so feel free to jump in.
You know, since I've been making all the noise, I guess I better go first. As you know from my title, I'm the executive director for the Central Vermont Council on Aging, and I'm the representative to the EAG for the what it's called the V4A, which is the Vermont Association of Area Agencies on Aging. Where there are five agencies that cover the entire state. I think the couple of ideas that have worked for us very, very well in terms of trying to get at the older Vermonter community, particularly those that have limited means, is through the 42 meal sites that are around the state. And that could be done in any, several different ways. One, every single AAA in the state maintains a list of all the people who participate in those websites. It'd be possible to get to those people either through on-site presentations. Many or with probably even most of them have some association with the senior center and are actually run by the senior center. So a way to get at those particular folks I think would be through the senior centers slash nutrition sites, one way or the other, either through on-site presentations, asking for flyers, maybe surveys of some sort to be put into the to the home delivered meals that are going out all the time. In fact, just to give you some idea what that means, in 2023, there were 1.2 million meals delivered through Meals on Wheels around the state. So there's an opportunity there to get directly to that particular group.
Thank you, John. Anything else? Jen?
Yeah, those are great numbers, John. And what I took away from our meeting, our last EAG meeting, was the importance of on-site meetings, and I really hope that's part of the mix. I think, not just elderly, but a lot of people, do not have the internet access, nor do they have the interest, honestly. So part of coming to a meeting and getting information is to seeing if you can trust the person that's speaking, seeing your neighbors there. So I think that's really important. And I do think that a lot of, certainly aging households, are definitely a target audience that really can be approached in an in-person manner. So I like that. I guess my experience is I think we've had the best response and learned the most when we've had a focus group or a listening session, and that was kind of part of my question. So that what do we, when we advertise these public engagements, which again I hope many will be kind of on site or welcoming in a community setting, what do we want to hear about, so that somebody doesn't come in and already feel like they don't know what the conversation is. Everybody in Vermont has heated their home. They have all different ways. So I think the benefit to us is hearing those experiential, hearing from them in their language and what they've dealt with. That's where I feel I'm going to learn the most about where the barriers are, where places that we need to be careful when we're working on this act. A couple places where I think that can happen, and we talked about it at the last meeting, was maybe going to one of the larger manufactured home sites and doing something there. I think also empowering community leaders to take the message out. So I don't think we have to have every be in charge of every engagement, but I think we should supply information to people. So for instance, like the energy committees through VCAN, they have regular networks and they're very interested in helping people transition. So getting the information to them so they can pass that on, and to hear about some of the public engagement opportunities. And the other is the community action. So they have, a lot of ways to communicate with people. And again, those are the places where I think you can get the word out about the community engagement, whether it's in person, on site, Zoom, so that more people know about what's going on.
I want to build off something John said, and Emily told me I could chime in. I was like, do I have to wait for my turn? She was like, no, chime in if you want to. Um, but I think what is particularly great about what John suggested is you're using a service that people are already using. And to me, that is the number one way that you get people to engage and give you feedback, is if they're coming for a service or they're coming for something that they already want. As much as, like, yes, everyone heats their home, very few people with high needs puts this on a top priority list to show up for something like this. Like you said, like, oh, let's have a focus group. Even if you're going to pay people or whatever, if they're severely disenfranchised, getting them to take the time out and the energy to do it is extremely difficult. And frankly, I've really never done it successfully. The places where I've successfully been able to gather feedback is by going and participating again in a service that's already being given. So sitting at senior centers at free meal times and talking at tables with people, going to food distribution sites like food banks and that kind of thing, and sitting and talking with people and providing an additional thing that maybe they want. So we gave out free shower heads and free light bulbs at food banks, and just sat and talked to people was really helpful. Um, uh, we went to just different community centers that were having like childcare events and places where people like libraries, that's the word I was trying to look for, sorry, libraries that had free reading time for families. And so the kids were being read to while the parents could talk to us, that sort of thing. I think it's really, really difficult, if not impossible, to ask people to take additional time out to do something. And then two, something of what Jen said in terms of getting feedback in the language that someone speaks or something like that. Creating affinity spaces and working with community leaders that create those affinity spaces so people feel really, really comfortable in coming to those meetings and know they're not going to have to, and no offense to any male white dudes on this call, but have to explain to a male white dude why they don't feel comfortable with white males coming into their home, right? Like that's a feedback that we got from Efficiency Vermont. We have a really hard time accessing your services because you tell us we have to work with contractors, and contractors are mostly white and male. And as a single Black mother, I'm not comfortable with them coming into my home, right? And saying that to a white male can be really hard. So leveraging community leaders that they're already comfortable with and in these affinity spaces already to get that feedback, to be able to be a safe space to talk about it, is extremely important. And then one other thing I'll say, a big lesson the Efficiency Vermont got through all of this was that we had to take about like 20 steps back in what we were talking about with people. Even talking about heating your home, even talking about heating systems was jumping steps in education that they weren't ready for. And so we talk now a lot about the difference between interpretation and translation. And so working with a really skilled interpreter that not only can maybe go from English to Spanish or whatever language you want to talk about, but can go from here's this complex thing and help you talk about it. The kind of national standard is usually about a 5th grade level. Like if you can explain this to a 5th grader, then that is the level that then you want to translate into the next language. I know the state of Washington, California, and I think Connecticut all have now statutes that state that when you're asking for public feedback, that public feedback has to be at, I think one state is 8th grade and one is 5th, but you're getting what I'm saying. Like really think about bringing down that level of knowledge before then you're trying to translate it into another language. There's a few companies out there that are really skilled at doing it, and we're actually talking to them now. Probia is one of like the national ones that we're talking to, that doesn't only provide translation services, but again, interpretation services. So I know I just talked a lot. Great note taking to whoever's typing. But those are some of the big things that I wanted to share.
Yeah, those are really important, Michelle, because, when you're in a group of people that have been kind of siloed on things like environmental or heat pumps or whatever, you have to step back and realize that, there's still a lot of people that don't, know how a heat pump works or have misinformation or,
Or what
I
is a
think
heat pump?
yeah, I
Like what?
just learned how a refrigerator worked about 5 years ago when I was teaching at a tech school. So, I know a lot of people that, very, very intelligent, very,
Yep.
involved in their lives, but, you know, so these things we throw around, different ways of heating, you're exactly right. It has to, again, listening more, the telling, so that we can interpret. Um, and that kind of brings up to, having English as a second language interpreters. So CVOEO has a great Office of Racial Equity and Inclusion that has community ambassadors. So that's just one place where I'd like to also see, new Americans and people who have some language barriers, which absolutely includes people who English is their first language, but the scientific language is, is a barrier in that it's not something they've been steeped in. All really important to make sure that the message both leaves and is received in a way that matches people's current understanding of the whole topic.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure CVOO, are you the guy, does your organization, one of the WAPs does home parties?
Yes,
It's like,
yes.
and that is like, that's it, right? It's a safe space, it's an affinity
Yeah,
space.
those
It
are
has
wonderful.
that is like, to me, that's how you do actual like feedback. Is you go to where people are comfortable, you make sure that they have something that they want to be at, and you're not forcing them to show up and talk about something. And I'll just say, Jen, the energy committees are so great in so many ways. I do not think they're very good at exactly what we're talking about.
Mhm.
They are all people who care a lot and know a lot about energy.
Right.
Asking them to go then talk to disenfranchised groups, and this is, I'm very much generalizing, there's some that may be better than others, but then asking them to go speak to disenfranchised groups of why they should do this is gone wrong so many times, in my opinion. Like, even just the way that they talk about, like, I was with some energy committee members that were talking to some very low income families and just talking about how like unsafe their home was for them. And do you know how hard that is when you don't have money to
Yes.
then fix your home, right? They don't have the training, knowledge, or skill set to be culturally or socially aware to speak to the demographics that you want to try to reach. And in my experience, are more likely to do damage and erode relationships rather than help build
Yeah.
them, because you
No,
need people trained in this.
right. No, I don't, I agree that someone has to be specially trained to do that. I was thinking of it as just an avenue to get it out information about, say, the Zoom, the
That's fair. Okay, yeah,
public
yeah.
input.
And yeah, thanks, Jen, because I do want to kind of bring us back into the space of the ETA, and what are we actually looking to do? Because I see there's kind of two threads. One is the public engagement that is currently going on, that is, kind of led through Curtis Reed and his public engagement piece that will feed into, or hopefully feed into, the work that the EAG does. And then there's kind of this next step, like kind of the suggestion from the EGA as, why am I saying EGA? The EAG. From the EAG, the recommendation that we may give of, okay, we have this report, we have the clean heat standard, like what additional public outreach needs to be done to make sure that it's implemented in a way that's equitable. So I see kind of those two pieces, and I want us to kind of be clear on what we're talking about, and also thinking through who is going to do each of these pieces. Are we talking about this being the responsibility of the EAG? Are we talking about this being the responsibility of the PUC? What timeline are we talking about? Because we have in the feedback from Aaron. I'm not actually sure if Aaron's part of the PUC, and maybe Dominic, you can clarify me with that structure, but we are being asked for feedback on how some of these further public engagements should go. And so if we're giving feedback on those specific pieces, it's good to be clear so that we know, so that we can actually give that feedback in a timely manner.
Correct. Just to clarify, Erin is on the CHS team at the PUC. She is, you know, the point of contact for that contract. Like everyone else on the team, she does a lot of things, but she is the channel to Curtis, and we have our second public engagement meeting with Curtis this afternoon, and whoever members of the public will show up to that. So obviously we're not going to be able to implement this for this afternoon, but we have a third one coming up early June that we would be able to condense these recommendations and hand them to Curtis as a directive.
That was going to be my suggestion. Was it seems like these shared experiences might be helpful for the PUC to share with Aaron and Curtis Reed Jr.'s next steps. I haven't really gone through Aaron's responses to the EAG feedback sent to the PUC, but at first look, it looks like I don't have too much discussion around those at this moment, but I feel like all three of our member organizations sharing this information with the PUC to then distribute to Curtis sounds like good next steps. Open to other ideas.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like your clarification. I do think that probably the best thing we can do today is maybe come up with 3 or 4 recommendations specifically for the work that Curtis does, since that's coming up. And then it sounds like I'm also hearing that there's some things maybe in our final report that have to do with equity and have to do with making sure that the public is aware and given an opportunity to be educated about what's going on with the act. But that is probably a second a second step to this.
I made this statement early on at an EAG general meeting, and I think it's worth repeating. The issue that we're looking at in equity isn't just equity for low income and families or individuals, BIPOC people, what have you. It's also the equity involved with just, the average guy on the street. As I explained to this group, several weeks ago, when I looked into installing a heat pump system in my house at about this time last year, I found out it was going to cost me $32,000 to do that. That's not money that I've got laying around that I can just feed into replacing my existing heating system, which was working just fine. So I didn't. But I think that it behooves us to understand that there are expenses involved in doing a complete swap over of a system that doesn't necessarily just affect low-income people. So I just want to keep that in front of us.
I might also add in those notes to share, or we don't have to add it, but my thought was maybe not all of these have to be recommendations either. I know that Curtis has asked in the past for member organizations to share their public engagement and what the scope of that is and who their public engagement is focused on. And so I think maybe even just sharing, even if it's not a recommendation, some of these notes of what our member organizations have learned and experiences. So
Maybe we could start like a kind of a bullet point list of just some of the things that we would like to see in the public input. I think, one of the first things I think of is what you mentioned, John, and Michelle, in person, some of them should be in person, safe spaces where people are at. So whether it's, Meals on Wheels or whether it's a manufactured home. And again, we have a limited amount of time. It's not like we're going to be able to reach everybody, but at least concentrating. I think there was a manufactured home site in maybe southern Vermont that was mentioned. So the variety of ways we ask for input, I think, is important. So on-site, safe spaces where people are already at, and also a variety of locations around the state. Sometimes I think Central Vermont gets a lot of focus, but I think it's important. So if we go, do something more in Southern Vermont, maybe something in the Northeast Kingdom. Again, trying to reach out to as many opportunities for people to come and speak as we can find in this initial public input.
Yeah. And any other suggestions specifically for Curtis's work for the next few public engagements? And sorry, I just need to charge my computer. So if I'm ducking out of the way, that's I'm just trying to plug in my charger.
Are we going to talk at all about Jen's questions that you sent around?
Yeah, we can. This is your meeting, so but yeah, one of the things I do want to just make sure that we flesh out is especially the things for Curtis's work as they're time sensitive, but Jen's questions I think also fold into that pretty well.
Right. It also brings up another question. For the public meeting that took place on the 17th and the one that's going to be this afternoon, do we know what sort of questions they're putting to the people who are attending those meetings?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I hope we're going to get recordings of them. But again, I think what was shared at the last meeting, what I've heard is maybe not so many members of the public so far, and a lot more like people that are already in the know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd love to have your feedback on those questions. And if there's a way that we could suggest maybe having a meeting that like elicits information from people instead of kind of having it be a place where they're supposed to ask questions and then be told something.
Well, I guess if we're going to talk about the questions for a second, that I think we need to kind of circle back a little bit and say that one of if not the concern, certainly the major concern with this whole initiative is the cost to anyone. And it seems to me that in order to get to that, there's a couple of questions, basic questions that should be included in something like the questionnaire that you put together, Jen. There's such things as, what are you now using to heat your home?
Mm-hmm.
What are you now spending it?
Sorry. What do you now?
What are you now using to heat your home? What fuel are you using?
Mm-hmm.
What's it costing you annually right now to heat your home? I mean, these are things that are pretty basic questions that I mean, people may not necessarily have the answers off the top of their head, but I would think that for some of these things, they could at least ballpark it. And I think that if anyone who is paying attention to what's going on with the clean heat standard is already aware that the biggest concern is it's going to cost people a lot of money to do it. So we need to find out, A, what are you doing now? And what do you think is going to be the issue going forward for you? Are you prepared to do what you need to do to put in a heat pump if you had some kind of subsidy provided to do that? If not, what would you need in terms of a subsidy to pay the extra money that you're going to have to pay for heating oil or for propane or what have you? I think those are all pretty basic questions.
And I apologize, I'm trying to follow everything going on, but I'm a little new here. But up on the Curtis recommendations piece, I do think capturing what we talked about above would be good in terms of like the interpretation piece, and that, like, I think we had a really good discussion of a lot of things that could be maybe even copied and pasted into there. Though I know Curtis, and I'm sure he's pretty aware of all those things. Um, but I just want to make sure, like, I don't know how these notes are shared, that is captured there.
No worries, and thank you for asking about the notes. So what I'll be doing after this, I'll be making this into a static document that cannot be changed, and I'm sending it to hopefully one of the members of the subgroup now. I am not able to do any kinds of changes to these types of notes or like create any types of notes. So it would be on the members of the subgroup to take these notes and either create them into something that Curtis can use, create them into something like a recommendation for the PUC, yeah, to develop them into the next product. So
Okay.
thanks for mentioning that, just so that we can keep that in mind.
And then just on the questions, I don't know how you guys plan to share these, but as someone who has asked many, many, many people, like, how do you heat your home? A lot of people don't know. You'd be surprised how many people will say like natural gas when there's no natural gas line, or they'll say propane when it's something else. I mean, they'll know if they do wood heat. I will just say that. And then they'll know, like, if you ask them if they have a boiler or furnace, they might not know, and that is particularly an issue if you're talking to renters. They're gonna have no idea. So that was gonna be my other question for all of this work. When you start talking about renters, it becomes a very different conversation. These questions may be okay for some people who own their home, but certainly if they rent, a lot of these questions are not going to be very applicable to them or know how to answer it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michelle. So yeah, another question should be, do you rent, and what are your heating costs?
Or
To get
even, what is your
like that.
biggest concern about your home?
Right.
Because it probably is not going to be, I had a utility one time ask me, like, how do people feel about their electric bill? And I'm like, if you're a renter, you may not even be seeing it. It may just be looped into your rental cost. Or like, if you're trying to figure out how to feed your family and you can go into arrears with your electric bill, you might not be paying attention to it. Or in heating your home, if you're getting LIHEAP or a fuel assistance program, you may not be very aware of it. Which, that is not a knock on any fuel assistance program, but when someone isn't looking at, oh, I'm going to be freezing because I have this assistance, they might not be paying attention to it. So like, I think you could rephrase some of these questions around people's needs and what they may be a little bit more aware about. Like, what is your biggest cost monthly? What is your biggest concern monthly? Have you ever gone without heat? Have you, in the summer, have you faced any health problems due to the heat of your home? With heat pumps, we're seeing more and more people calling into our contact center with concerns in the summer about their children or elderly members that are getting too hot. And heat pumps can cool just as much as they can heat. So just reframing outside of heating costs, fossil fuels. Again, these are all things that maybe for some people are not going to resonate, but when you're talking about cost, health, concerns, that kind of thing, that's going to probably resonate with more people than some of these other questions.
I have a quick question for either this group or the PUC. Excuse me. I wasn't around the week that the first public engagement meeting happened, and I haven't watched the recording or read notes or anything. So apologies that I'm not quite caught up on that, but I'm curious what the format was if questions were already asked to the public. And I'm just starting to think about that. So it seems like a lot of these questions are really touchy and personal, and I'm curious like what Jen's was thinking about, like where these questions would be asked and in what format and what kind of relationship has there been with the public with the questions, because I don't know what that looked like in the first meeting.
Yeah, I haven't seen the recording either, so I'm really anxious. What I was thinking, maybe these questions would be more part of the outreach. So, you know, we're looking for people who want to talk about these things because we want to make sure that you know, whatever this program we come up with addresses it. So inviting people to come in who want to talk about these things, who have concerns, rather than putting someone on the spot. And you know, and asking, you're right, I don't want to ever again, being a teacher, I never like to put someone on the spot. I think, but I thought maybe when the flyer goes out, hey, come, you know, come to, you know, this input meeting.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kinds of things we'd love to hear about. You know, how you heat your home, what is the cost of heating your home, what are your concerns about heating your home in the future, and then hoping that people who want to talk about that will be the ones that will be at the meeting and feel safe and feel like they're being asked to share this information because it will be helpful.
Thanks for that clarification. Sorry if that was obvious and
No,
I didn't catch that.
Just to answer your specific questions, Emily, I was also not at the first one, so I don't know exactly what happened. The recording has not been, I have not seen it yet. We asked for it. We have not gotten it yet. Fortunately, Curtis's contract is fairly small. That's just the money the legislator gave us. So I think that's probably impacting the timing on it. As soon as I get it, I'll share it with this group. I don't yet know if we'll be posting it publicly. There's a question, and I'd actually be interested in this group's opinion. On one hand, we want this to be as transparent as a process as possible. On the other hand, when we are asking people to come and talk to us about things that intimately affect their day-to-day life, we don't want to be, you know, broadcasting that to the entire state. So if this group has any opinions on publicly posting this webinar, I would definitely take that input. And then I do plan on sharing it with the equity advisory group for the purpose of improving the engagement in the future. But I don't have it yet, so.
I guess my take is that if someone was making comments or answering questions in a open public forum, I can't see how they would have any objection to that being given a wider airing. It's already out there. It's not like it was a private meeting that was, you know, I'm sure that they were made aware at the time that this was being recorded. So they must have realized that it was going to be used for some purpose.
I think yeah, just noting that not knowing what those meetings looked like, I think we may not have a perspective right now, and if the answer to that question of whether those webinars should be posted publicly. And by we, I didn't mean the group, I meant Efficiency Vermont.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes left, and I do just want to come up with a little bit of next steps, both for this group in general and for just the next steps regarding like the notes that we've taken and what we'd like to do with them. So as far as it goes with this, with sorry, as far as it goes with the group itself, is this something that we'd like to continue to meet on a regular basis? Are there other topics that we want to continue to talk about? Are we feeling good about where we are? Are we feeling like we need more thought?
I think I would like to hear from the equity advisory group as a large about what folks think need to be discussed past the public engagement facilitator meetings, facilitated meetings by Curtis. I think that, not to share with the rest of the group, but I think that I'd need to have some internal discussions about if this is a regular meeting, what our participation looks like. So I guess I'm just curious what the larger the advisory group is thinking about in terms of public engagement needs from this sub.
I'm also thinking that we probably should, if we're gonna have another meeting, I would suggest that we wait to set that up until we've all had the opportunity to look at the listen to and see the recording that was made, to see what actually happened at that meeting on the 17th of April. I think it would guide us in some way towards, so what other things should we be addressing?
I think that's a great idea. And I think in the meantime too, we could maybe take again some of the bullet points to try to give some suggestions. I imagine that I know there's 3 public input done through Zoom, I think that's scheduled, but I'd like to also have some input on what's coming later in the summer. So maybe we could share some bullet points as to that we're hoping there'll be, a variety of different ways of public engagement.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And just checking in with Dominic, I know that so in the email exchange with Aaron, they said that Curtis would not be sharing the recording until he posts the final report. So timeline for that seems to be longer than what we might maybe imagining. And then
I
additionally,
am sorry, I did not catch that when I was reading through. Yes, well, I will be at this meeting this afternoon, and I will take diligent notes that I can share if this recording is not going to be available.
sorry, I misread that.
Apologies
So the
for-
report that he will submit to us this week. So
Oh,
okay,
okay, good.
that's totally different than what I said.
Yeah.
Great. And then as far as further engagements, you did mention that Curtis's scope was limited. So I want to make sure that we're on target, imagining that when we're imagining further public engagement, this may not be through Curtis. And so, yeah, just maybe some clarity around that, Dominic, would be helpful.
So his contract has 6 public engagement meetings. The first 3 are scheduled. We had last month, today, and then I think it's June 6th, if my memory serves. So we've got those 3 scheduled. Then we have 3 more that we have him under contract for. This input will be useful for to a limited extent for the June meeting, and then to a great extent for the other 3 meetings. If there is public engagement needed beyond those 3 additional meetings, we would take that feedback, and the PUC would definitely look into it, but we do not have the resources on hand to conduct those. Those 3 meetings, we plan for, we know at least one of them will be post our final draft of the draft rule being out, so we can get feedback on that in accordance with the law. And that leaves 2 that aren't totally committed. We do think another one of those will be at the same phase of already the whole thing's out. What do people think? And that leaves 1 that we're still taking some pretty wide input on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. And I just putting that back on the EAG members, I'm wondering if that changes any of the thoughts that we have on the public engagement recommendations, or the way that we imagine I'm giving these recommendations, or if they stay the same.
I think personally that this is all best practices shared, so maybe not we're recommending that Curtis or the PUC do this, but sharing that this is what has worked for our member organizations and this is why and this is what was discussed would be helpful to share either way. Dominic can let us know if he disagrees with that. But yeah, curious what other things. But I think that what we've talked about are helpful public engagement best practices, and maybe not recommending all of these are implemented, but just sharing them is a good next step.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the truth is that like a lot of the best practices we've talked about takes a lot of staff and time. And if this is just Curtis, like I don't know where the resources come to do these things. It's really impossible to do as one person. So it's just the reality of it.
Okay. And well, one thing, okay, so sorry, there's a lot going on in the chat, so I do want to mention that Anthea Dexter Cooper has sent a copy of the recording that an attendee received and the slide deck, so I'll go ahead and put those in our notes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, very helpful. And the slide deck. And I do also want to take a moment to pause for any additional public comment. I think we have Anthea, Spencer, and Julie on the line. Okay, hearing none, I'd like to ask if there's any member who'd like to go ahead and take these. I'll send these notes out to the group, but if there's anyone who'd like to take them and shape what we would like to send to the PUC and Curtis by proxy, and also shape what additional questions we still have for the EAG as a whole, and thoughts about recommendations for the final report. I think we have a good smattering. So, and I keep saying recommendations, but maybe best practices is a better way. But anyone who would like to kind of consolidate the things that we've talked about today.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be away for about 6 days at my daughter's graduation, so I'm not able to volunteer for that right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Jen. I'd be happy to if that works for the other members of this group.
Thank you.
Good, John. Yeah. And then, so just to clarify, Ashira, I will compile these. I'll probably add a disclaimer that we understand public engagement is limited with the timeline and resources that we have right now, but these are just best practices that we wanted to share. Do I share this with Mia and you before the group, or this subgroup before the next EAG meeting? What are the next steps once I create that draft?
So I would share it to the subgroup again and give everyone who's in this group an opportunity uh, to reply, and then and it's not necessary that it goes to Mia or I, as long as it has the consent of this subgroup. But if there are specific points that you'd like to bring up at the next EAG meeting, if you can let me know that so that I can just make sure that we have enough time to talk about it.
So the intent would be to share this with the advisory group. Is that correct? Or we share this out?
So from what I was hearing, it seems like there's things that we want to share with the advisory group. There's things that we want to share with Curtis and the PUC. And then it seemed like there were some questions as well. Okay, yeah.
I think
So
that
so maybe dividing those two pieces would be helpful.
okay. I personally think doing what the credit ownership group, when they came back with the document for the EAG to review, makes sense. If the other members of this group thinks that makes sense too. So it all coming back to the equity advisory group. How does that sound, Jen and John?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, thank you all. It was a packed 1 hour, but I think we got some good things, and yeah, we'll continue moving this forward. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or anything comes up.
Great. Thank you,
Happy Tuesday,
Michelle, for
everyone.
your input. Lots of experience there. Thank you, Ashira. Well run.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.